When you first look at the project metadata that's possible in the inspector on the right, it can be a bit intimidating. There's a lot of options here for how a project can operate, and it's sometimes helpful to just have someone talk through some of the details of how each one of those operate and what the scenarios are where you could use those. So let's do that. We previously have talked about the type. So if we go to this project area here, the title's pretty obvious, but if you go to the project section here, the type is one we've talked about. The context, now that might be a bit confusing. Why would you want a context on a project? And I've run into this in a couple scenarios where I have a project and I know that just based on that project, that the vast majority of the tasks that I have in that project are going to apply to a certain context. So for example, say I have a project to literally develop a new website. So I'm going to write all the code for it. Well, I have a context called develop. So if I type in D on that, it's going to pull up its quick search functionality here, and I could apply develop to that project. Now, whenever I add a new task to that project, so say I were to look at that, and I'm going to add a new project, and I call that code front page. If I do that, you'll notice that the context is automatically assigned as develop. And that makes it a lot easier for me because I know that if it's one that's a code-heavy project, it will just automatically add it every time, and that's where I want those particular tasks to go. So it's kind of handy. I actually use it in sub-projects quite a bit whenever you group things. If I've got a couple of that, so I'm going to code the legal page for them as well. So if I'm going to do that, I may take those two, create a group out of them. If I grab those and do it just like that, then it will allow me to, as I continue adding different items to that, it's again going to just continue adding the context to them because the sub project there has develop on it. Now, I went through that really quick. In order to do that, I'm just using a keyboard shortcut of Control Command Right. So if I were to select those three again and go Control Command Left, it will pull them off of those. Control Command Right, we'll do it again. And another way to do that is to come up here to the Organize side, and you can do the Move section, and again, you can do the Move Left, and then you can go back into Move and do Move Right. And I've just found that Control Command and the arrows works really well. So if I wanted to move them to the left and then move them all up and down, it's pretty handy to just hold on to Control Command and then move things around. So it makes things really easy to do that. But what I'm getting at here is this context piece over here on the project side. It's really handy to have that to where I can just assign the context to the main project or to the sub-project and be able to let the items underneath of it just assume that context. Now, status here, if you look at this is your flag icon. So if I click that, it's going to automatically flag the project as a whole, and therefore it flags all of the tasks assigned to it. There are a lot of ways that you can use flags. We're going to get into that later, but the core of it is that you can flag. It does have the ability to flag specific tasks or projects. If you want to flag a project, this is one way to do it. Another way to do it is you can just click on this box here and do the same thing. So one of the nice things about OmniFocus is there's a lot of ways to do some of the same functionality. It's really handy because then it just allows you to work with it the way that works with you. The other option here is the status, and you've got active, on hold, completed, and dropped. Most of mine are inactive. Obviously, that's when I can actually work on them. If I moved it to on hold, it will just pause that project. You see the icons change for it, and that simply pulls it out of the stream. It simply says that we're going to hold on to this. I want it still there, but it's not going to fill up my context. It's not going to make it an available project. It's not something that I'm working on. So that's handy whenever you're doing your reviews and you run across a project that you want to do, but it's just not, you just don't have time for it. You just need to put it on pause for now. You put it on the back burner. I do it quite frequently. Right now, I think I have about 20 projects in that, and there's probably a good chance I'm actually going to drop those at some point in the future, but I like to hold on to them because I'm being optimistic. So what I'm getting at there is it's sometimes nice to just pause things and get them out of the general flow of things. So one of the others is completed. If you click on that, it's the same as marking the whole project as done. So when you're done with a project, you can mark it completed. The other is dropped. So like I was talking about with whenever I decide not to do a project anymore and I drop it, that's when I'll mark. And you might be wondering what the difference between completed and dropped is. And the core difference there is that when you mark it completed and it goes into the main database, it is part of the whole of the completed and the actually progressed projects within your database. If I mark it as dropped, it moves it to a separate archive and it doesn't go into your record of actually completed work. So there's a slight difference in how it's handled on the back end, but on the front end, the way that I think about it is that I mark it completed when I actually did the work, and I mark it as dropped when I'm no longer going to do the work. If I just think about it that way, then the whole back end side takes care of itself. So that's the best way I know to think about it. The last piece of this project section is complete when completing last action. And this is something I use fairly frequently, mostly in my sequential projects. Rarely will I use that in parallel. I would almost argue that you should never use it when you have a parallel project. But if I were to go to this other one, the article that I'm writing, you'll notice that I have that complete when completing last action. And the reason for that is that I know every single step that goes into that project. And I know that if I complete every step and every action that I have assigned to that project, when I'm done with them, I need to mark the project as completed. Well, the nice thing about this particular checkbox is whenever I click that and I complete all the items on that list, the project will automatically be marked as completed. So it just kind of speeds up the process a little bit. It's pretty handy to do that. Now, if we move on to the dates section, one of the first ones that's on this list is estimated time. And if you're good at estimating how much time a project will take, you can put that in here as well. I use that more on the task side of things, but if I'm completely honest, I rarely use it. I just don't find a use of the estimated time piece. Some people love it. If it works for you, go for it. There are some scripts out there that can allow you to summarize how much work you have selected, how much you have in a perspective. There's a lot of things you can do with that estimated time. Metadata, for me, I just don't see it as something that works out well. It's not something that adds value for me. So one of the key features of OmniFocus that sets it apart is the defer dates. And that's what you see the next in that dates section where it says defer until. And it's really nice, especially with stuff like writing a blog post. So if I've got that selected, or I'm just not on it and I've got it selected in the sidebar over here, if I'm able to determine when I'm going to start working on that, or I don't have time to work on it right now, but I will next week, I can just click the 1 week button. It will mark that whole project as deferred. You notice that the first task in that list is now grayed out, and I'm set to just continue my work, but that task will show up automatically on August 4th, and I am good to go. Now, I can continue to adjust that by clicking the 1 day, but one of the nice things about OmniFocus is that you can also do things like put in tomorrow, hit enter, and it will automatically drop it in. You can also do, say, 5 days, and it will figure that out as well. And something else I've seen, too, is you can also drop in, say, 1 week minus 2 days, and it will figure that one out as well. So if you know when you want things to be put off to until, this defer date is really handy for that. The same process of how the dates work apply to how the due date works. And something I would caution you on with due dates is to truly consider whether or not you need a due date. This is something a lot of people like to assign arbitrary due dates so that way they know they can somehow trick themselves into working on things and getting them done at a certain time. I want this article done by next Friday. That's nice, but that's not an actual due date. That's a I would like to have it done by then due date. So it doesn't really work out that way, because what if you have a report that needs to be in front of a board of directors next Tuesday, but next Tuesday you have 4 articles that you've marked as due? That particular report is going to fall into this broader list of due date stuff that just clutters it all up, and you're potentially going to miss it, and then you do have a problem. So be very careful with due dates. Right now, I think I only have maybe 3 tasks out of probably 400 or 500 that have any due date on them at all. It just doesn't, it can create a lot of issues if you start to do them too much. The other one that's in this list is completed. I never touch this one. If you want to mark a project completed at a certain date, certain time, you can do that. I just let the system take care of it whenever I mark something completed. It does that for me. I don't ever touch it. Some people like to adjust it for certain things, for reporting and such. I just don't see the point in changing it. The next section down is repeats. This one's complicated enough and has enough power. I'm dedicating a whole video to it, so I'll drop a link to that in the notes below this video, but go check that one out if you want to get into the repeat functionality, because there's a lot of power that can come from how you set up projects for repeating. There are 2 last sections down here. The review section, which OmniFocus has this whole review functionality built into it, which is extremely handy and has a lot of power. You can set when you want the next review to happen, which, depending on how your defaults are set up, most people set that up to review them once a week. And in this case, I created the project, and then 1 week out from the date I created it is August 4th, and it's set to review every 1 week. Now, you can set that to where it's every single day. Sometimes people have reasons for wanting to do that. You've got a daily review. You want to use the review functionality to do that. You can do that type of thing. I have some projects that I only want to review once a year. It's an annual review process for me, is to review certain things once a year. Or if you manage like your monthly or your daily routines in OmniFocus, you may want to look at those and review your routine once a month. Any of those scenarios are possible using that review date. You simply go to the review perspective and then you can start to work with it from there. So there's a lot of power in how you have that. The one thing it does not have is the ability to say that every Friday I want to review all my projects. So it doesn't have the ability to do that, which is why I've created a script to allow me to adjust these review dates so that I can set an exact day of the week or of the month or of the year to review certain projects. So we'll get into that in the scripting video for scheduling reviews. But for now, just know that you can set these up. Some people like to do mini reviews every single day, but there's a lot of ways that you can use that review functionality. The main thing is that you have a lot of flexibility in how you set those up. The last section down here is for the notes on a project, and there's some people that never use these. Some people think that they are awesome, and I'm one that tends to think that they are awesome because I can drop links into those. I can bring files into them, links to files, shortcuts to files. Like, you can do all kinds of things inside that note field. The main one that I like to do is to drop links into them. So let's say that this particular article that I'm writing on reading books also applies to the design website for Google project. So if I were to right click that project for design website, I can copy that project as a link. And then if I go back to the project for the article and I go down to that notes field and then I paste that in, I now have a link back to the other project. So if I click on that link, you see it automatically takes me to that design website for Google project. So it's pretty handy to be able to jump from project to project using those notes and to be able to collect information about a project. Sometimes whenever specifically with this blog post process, if I'm collecting that particular idea for a blog post, I sometimes have ideas for what I want in the article. And I have it set up so that whenever I collect it and I create that, all of my notes for what I want on that article show up in the notes field in OmniFocus. So it's just a really handy way to collect information about it. Sometimes I wish the notes field was a little more accessible and had a little more visibility, but it's still an awesome feature to have, and there's a lot of ways to use it. So one thing I want to point out before we conclude this process is this inspector is not the only way that you can access all of this metadata. A lot of it is functional through what you can see right here at the top. So you've got the flag, you've got the defer and due dates. You can actually customize this to show some of the other stuff, but you've also got the notes fields right here. So if I were to go over here and start typing on some things, I can start to get that information to show up out here as well. So, and you can edit out here again as well. So there's just a lot of ways that you can work with it. It has a lot of ways, again, of getting at the same information. But that's how the metadata works. And it really does have a lot of power that you can pull through there, and there's a lot of customization that goes to it. That's one of the things that gets people at first is it's so powerful that it sometimes is paralyzing as to where to start. So I would just keep things simple, start with parallel projects. Don't mess with the defer and due dates at first until you start to build the need for those. Work with weekly reviews and just kind of build your way into it. And over time, you'll start to really leverage the power that comes from some of that project metadata.